Hey folks, thanks so much for tuning in. For those of you that follow me for the Beatles podcast that I do, for Things We Said Today and Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles videocast, you'll note that in most cases, with the exception of when there is an extra show that we throw in, I always have newscasts at the top of the show. And in the most recent Things We Said Today, we had a lot of news to get to. And rather than have a very long broadcast of that, I figured I'd split it up just a little bit and throw more news here on my channel. Now, most of the major news of the last few weeks are covered on the last Things We Said Today, and that was the show in which we tackled the subject of whether or not Wings was a real band with our special guest Al Sussman, which you should check out if you haven't done so already. But if you're craving more Beatle news, then I've got some here just for you. Okay, so this is what we didn't cover in the Things We Said Today podcast. We're going to start with news about Julian Lennon, who appeared on The View just recently to discuss his new photography book called Life's Fragile Moments. He also discusses his concerns about the environment, and he had a few words about his and the Beatles' legacy. You can actually watch this interview now on YouTube. And remember, Julian has an ongoing exhibit of his photos called Reminiscence, going on now through April the 6th at the Freeman Gallery in New York City. The makers of Uncut Magazine have a new issue out as an ultimate record collection guide, and it covers the Beatles from 1960 through 64. They actually cover their albums, singles, EPs, and what they call their definitive timeline. Thanks to John Rainey for that information. A new magazine called The Oldie has George Harrison on the front cover with him in a field of flowers, and the caption underneath reads, "I was George Harrison's gardener." And that would be Neil Titley, the name of his gardener, who also has something to say on George's flower power. That's how it's worded on the front cover of the Oldie. Again, thanks to John Bazzini for that. That's the April issue of the Oldie. Also, the March issue of Mojo magazine has Ringo on the front cover with the quote, "I'm an emotional guy." An interview with Ringo has him discussing fame, fortune, and the Beatles. Ringo is also on the front cover of Relics magazine, where in an interview he explores the American sounds that captivated him as a young musician in Liverpool long before he joined the Beatles. I know I mentioned this in my newscast about half a year ago. We started to hear about this. The follow-up to the film Spinal Tap. Rob Reiner has been working on the follow-up film called Spinal Tap 2, The End Continues, and it will be in theaters on September the 12th. Why am I mentioning this? Because Paul McCartney will be making a cameo appearance in the film, as will Elton John. Just released on Cleopatra Records is a compilation called Anarchy on Abbey Road, a punk tribute to the Beatles, which includes 15 cover versions of Beatles songs by veteran punk rockers who turned the Beatles catalog upside down. Artists like the Flamin' Groovies, Smash Mouth, and Eddie and the Hot Rods. Okay, thanks to John Bazzini for that. Where would I be without John for all this information? A new book is due out June the 19th called The Science of the Beatles, the Theory and Technology Behind the Music and Lyrics by Mark Brake and Dr. Jeff Brake. It's described in Amazon as an in-depth analysis of the Beatles' music and the theory, techniques, and technology that made it possible. This will be coming out on paperback. Again, John Bazzini. Thanks for that information. Some books that have just been released. First of all, there's Yoko Ono, a biography by David Sheff. You should know David for a 3-hour interview that he did with John and Yoko shortly before John was murdered, and that was for Playboy magazine. And he's also kept up a strong friendship with Yoko Ono since John's passing. The new book was just released. You can now order it on Amazon. You can order it online. as well as let's see. There is David Bedford's brand new book. Now, you should know David for a series of books. He's been pretty busy with a lot of books out on the Beatles, including one that he's certainly well known for, Liverpool, Birthplace of the Beatles, and also the Fab 104 on this very channel about 4 years ago. Yeah, 2020. He was here to discuss his book at the time, which was called The Country of Liverpool, Nashville of the North, and it really goes into detail. It's really an exhaustive study of how big country music was in the town of Liverpool, and you might want to check that out. I'll provide a link for that in the description box. But David has this new book out called What If, and it examines 70 key moments in the Beatles' history where a change in circumstances might have made a huge difference in the Beatles' story. And I think many of us have done this at times. We've wondered, well, what if Decca Records actually signed the Beatles and didn't turn them down? What if George Martin wasn't their producer? Would they have been nearly as successful? What if Brian Epstein didn't manage the Beatles? Or the flip side of that, what if Brian Epstein did manage them and he didn't die in 1967? Questions like those are brought up in this book, and the two authors, well, they theorize all about this and they draw their own conclusions as to what, might have happened. The whole Beatles story is a maze of so many incredible decisions and events that happened at a certain time where if one thing changed, it could have really altered history in some way. So that's what they examine in this brand new book, which you can now order called What If? And also our good friend Luca Perassi, who you probably know for the many books he's put out on Paul McCartney, including there's 2 volumes so far of Paul McCartney, Music is Ideas, the stories behind the songs. This one I'm holding up is actually volume 2, covering the years 1990 through 2012. Well, he just put out his first book on Ringo Starr, and it's very much kind of similar to what he was doing there with the Paul McCartney books. The name of the book is I Play the Piano If It's in C. Of course, that's a line from Ringo's song Early 1970. And it also says The Stories Behind the Songs, Volume 1. And it covers the years 1970 through 1997. And they cover 157 songs in the book. And he says 23 of them are unreleased. I find that really intriguing. I'll probably go right to that as soon as I get a copy of this book. But it also discusses everything in Ringo's career, including the all-star bands he's been in, and when he has appeared on other people's albums as a drummer as well, as a sideman for others. Okay, and again, that has just been released. You can order that book. I did mention Bruce Spicer has another new book coming out in his series where he covers the Beatles albums in detail. And the next one will be for Beatles for Sale and Help. This is the last in his series on the Beatles albums. That's actually coming out in August. Now, Bruce is going to be one of many authors that you can catch this coming weekend at the Fest for Beatle fans. So that book will not be available at the fest this time, but there will be a fest in Chicago in August, and he will be there offering that book. And it will include, as have all the other books in this series, special pieces written by Al Sussman and Pierce Hemmingson, who wrote all about the Beatles in Canada, Bill King, the editor for Beatle Fan, and Frank Daniels. They're all included in the new book from Bruce Spicer, which, like I said, is coming out in August. The Beatles anthology book is being reissued, and the date for that is October the 13th, which makes everyone wonder if this book is coming out, are there any plans for anything to be done with the audio and video for the Beatles anthology? It's actually the 30th anniversary this year since the Beatles anthology was released. So we're all wondering about that. And by the same token, it's kind of interesting that Paul McCartney has a couple of releases coming out on Wings. He has his own book coming out in November on the group. And then there'll also be a documentary called Men on the Run coming out this year. I'm not sure if it'll be at the end of the year or maybe the middle of the year, but it makes you wonder, be the perfect time for London Town and Back to the Egg to come out for archival box sets, tying in with all this other Wings activity. Okay, so again, the Beatles anthology book coming out October the 13th. Danny Harrison will be performing at the Glastonbury Festival this year, which happens June 25th through the 29th. He'll actually be performing on the Friday night in their acoustic tent, although he's saying it won't be an acoustic set. On the official country album charts in the UK, Ringo Starr's new album, Look Up, is in the number 9 position, but it did hit number 1 on that chart in the UK, the official country album charts. Also, the Fab Four Music Festival returns to Connecticut on May the 17th at the Dudleytown Brewery in Windsor. It includes live Beatles music from Beatles tribute bands from all over New England, plus record and memorabilia vendors, authors, exhibits, and fab fun. Okay, I do believe that's it for all the news that I have for you at this moment. I hope to see many of you at the Fest for Beatle fans this coming weekend. That's March the 28th through the 30th, but I will actually only be there on the Saturday, which is the 29th, and there will be panel discussions for both podcasts, for which I'm a co-host. There's Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles videocast, which will be at 2:30 on Saturday, and for Things We Said Today, that will be at 4:30. But if you spot me anywhere, stop by and say hi, chat Beatles with me. And I love talking about the Fab Four, as you know. Thank you so much for tuning in for this extra Beatles newscast. And we'll see you next time. Take care.